Hello and welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar titled Sustainability Programs Throughout Europe. Please tell us where you're tuning in from today by typing into the chat box appropriate details. First, a few words from IFMA's Managing Director, Lara Payman.
Thank you, Nick. And welcome everybody from my side as well. I'm really excited as this is a webinar that is linked to our first white paper for the European Operations and Maintenance Survey that was done, and two more will follow, and I'm sure that Nick will elaborate on that later on. We were extremely proud and grateful that we've received a lot of responses from our European members and network. We currently have 12 chapters in Europe, and we're growing fast. So I'm not going to bother you too much with these details. I will hand it over back to Nick, and I wish you an excellent webinar and some great insights from our experts today.
Panelists for today's session are Jake Smithwick, PhD, Principal Investigator, University of North Carolina at Charlotte; Maciej Wisniewski, CEO and co-owner of Loredo Real Estate Solutions; David Jones, Global Head of Costing, Sodexo. Over to you, Jake.
Great, thank you so much, Nick, and thank you all for being here today. We greatly appreciate it. We're excited to give this presentation, and with that said, we'll go ahead and dive in. As was mentioned, this is the first of 3 white papers that is being developed. The first one is about sustainability. The second one is about maintenance practices, and the third one will be focused on soft services and other things related to that. So be sure on the lookout for that, and that'll be coming out here soon. So today's agenda, we're going to go through the benchmarking process just to set the stage of what we're talking about. We'll go through some of the demographic factors of the buildings that we'll be talking about from the study. And then finally, we'll dive in deep to our discussion on sustainability programs and various initiatives that are tied to that. And again, folks, I encourage you to use the chat box today, ask questions, engage with us, because we have a great panel here today. And I'm very thankful for Maciej and David for joining as well to provide their insights and their expertise. So, the first question that we've been asked a couple times is, why benchmarking, why Europe, and what's the broader goals of this entire initiative? IFMA has a strategic initiative to gather and disseminate global performance benchmarks for facilities throughout the world. Obviously, North America's report has been around for decades. IFMA recently released the report in Asia. There's one in India. We have the Europe one, which is more of a pilot study. The Middle East is coming on board too, and there'll be other regions in the future as well. So benchmarking is really useful for us because it helps us understand how we compare to our peers and opportunities for success. So that's why we are doing this effort, and this is what's really driving strategically our interest in having this particular study. The survey has been going on for a few years now. We did cut off a survey collection, and so this is again a summary of what this is. Briefly about our group, Simplar, as was mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. I work with other faculty throughout the U.S. as we conduct research in a variety of areas related to the built environment. And so you can definitely check that out, but we're glad to be here today. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the details about the respondents and what this report is. Now, a bit of a brief history lesson here is that this report is in part due to a long history of practical reports, useful reports that IFMA has published over the years. Obviously, there's the North American version, the Operations and Maintenance Benchmark. There is a follow-on study focused on qualitative measures related to O&M performance. There's another report on space planning, which, by the way, is being updated as we speak. This year, this report is going to be updated. And then just last year, we published the Global Salary Compensation Report. So IFMA has done a fantastic job in terms of reaching out to the members to evaluate key things and to embed those lessons learned on future studies that are also collected. So as we continue having these studies, we build on the previous works to develop and deliver something that's actually useful to our members. So how do we actually collect this report and prepare this? Well, The first thing is that, as I mentioned, we start with the North American Virtual Report just as a starting point. It's been around for, I don't know, maybe 30 years or so. And so that was our baseline starting point. We looked at that survey questions and we developed and modified it to be fit for the European market. There's a group of subject matter experts. We greatly appreciate Machi was actually one of our SMEs, David as well. And so that's why I'm on the call here today. But we reviewed the survey and they provided insights and feedback as to what that should look like. It was sent to IFMA and non-IFMA members. There's no requirements to be a member, but this is who is sent to. We had respondents from these countries listed: Austria, United Kingdom, Germany, Ireland, Netherlands, Poland, Spain, and Switzerland. And in total, we received 59 survey responses, which, in spite of the large geographic region and membership, it is a limited response. So think of this report more as a white paper, as a pilot study of here's what we can do, here's some of the type of data we can produce so that, and hopefully in future iterations, we can have a significantly higher level of participation by IFMA members, throughout the region. Okay, so these are the types of buildings and what they look like in terms of responses. So industry sector, that's what this shows. We had about 36 folks respond that worked in a services sector, so think of banking or professional services. We have manufacturing in 8 cases, institutional. So this is your government buildings. Educational is another common one that's embedded within institutional. And so this is kind of the breakdown of the types of folks that responded to the survey. You also have facility use. So how the building is used. So this is how the building is used, and this is what sector that building is used in. So offices are primarily the number one, along with some other types of facilities that are listed out. Now, the reason why these demographic factors are useful for us, because as we present measures from the report, they are generally categorized by different demographic factors. So that's why that's useful for us, so that if you're comparing to somebody else in your sector or to a different type of building you're looking at, those demographic factors helps us compare appropriately based on what our interest is. Here's a breakdown by country. Netherlands and Poland were well represented, and you can see that there's a few other countries that had a handful of responses as well. Other demographic factors we had is the facility age. So you can see here that there is a handful, about a quarter, just slightly under a quarter, that are pretty new buildings, less than 5 years old. And then, as is typical with many other IFMA studies, is more than half of these are 25 or more years old. And that's a very common trend that we see. In terms of the facility description, the reason why this is relevant for us is, does the respondent manage a single building by itself, or are they responsible for a portfolio of buildings? And we have found that in other studies and other research that the type of building that we manage is affected, or it influences the type of measures and benchmarks that we're going to use and how we apply those in our facility. And then finally is space management. You can see here that not only the type of building, whether it's a single building or portfolio, but whether we lease those buildings, whether we own those buildings and occupy them, or do we own it and lease it to others. Because again, of course, based on how we manage that building will dictate different practices that are tied to that. So just to keep in mind that, again, as we present this data, there's different for that. So one of the first questions I wanted to kind of bring our panelists into here, Machi and David, is especially with COVID-19, we've seen that space management is really quite the challenge for a lot of facility managers. And so in your experiences, and I'll start off with you, Machi, is what are some best practices or tools that you've seen from a space management standpoint that have been beneficial? Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Hi. Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here and share with you some input from Poland. This question is quite challenging to be answered, because from a FM perspective, when we operate or manage the building, if it's COVID or not, we operate it as usual. The building needs to work. Maybe what we get from the building is different. We get different measurements, we get different benchmarks, we get different feeling, and we can notice how building works during this specific period. Of course, the communication is different, the accessibility is different, and all the security elements, health and safety area are a little bit different during that perspective. So from the space management during this specific period, it's more process and planning than tools, because tools what we have currently on the building, like access control, mostly we manage new buildings, as you mentioned, less than 5 years old. We have good access control systems that we can quickly and easily coordinate who's in the building, how many people, who's entering the building at all. So we noticed that we didn't need any special additional tools or software, for example, to manage that spaces. Of course, in some of the buildings, there are specific software applications to manage the space inside the for example, tenant space, to manage the hot desks or other activities, to order the conference room. But from the global FM perspective, the buildings are quite well secured with the devices already from as a shell and core, not tenant space.
Great. Thank you, Maciej. And David, how about you? Have you seen any tools that have been beneficial from a space management standpoint, or things to think about? I know you're really into data and how we use that data. Any thoughts from your perspective on how we can leverage tools?
Yeah. I mean, I think just following up on what has just been said, I think it's we've had COVID, or we are in COVID globally, and it's at a different stage within different regions. And then the drive of how is that building being used, and understanding how that building can be used. So flexible sort of frameworks around if we're reducing our footprint within an office, for example, could we repurpose that space for whatever it is, like a food retail outlet or whatever it is, or can we move those assets around and things like that? But understanding the context and what you're going to do with the building is really important. And that obviously comes down from the top, is like, what is the strategy for the business? But having said that, you need the data to understand what the impact and model the impact of what that usage will have for sustainability, for revenue, for your building performance. That is, to me, is like a sort of key. To gather that data, that there are some sort of challenges that have just been mentioned around security and things like that. So IoT, BIM, these are all good sort of tools and systems that we can start to use. They have their own inherent sort of challenges, like you've just alluded to, Jake. Like some of these buildings are over 25 years old. How do you retrofit? And what is that cost versus benefit, like value for money sort of case in doing that? Not just from a cost point of view, but, focusing on the paper, the sustainability sort of impact and those sort of trade-offs. And I think within the report, there is like about battery recycling and things like that, things that are low costs that we can do to have an impact. Like I say, and then just focusing on that, once you come up with that planning of the space utilization, how are you actually going to deliver that? And that's where the data, the benchmarking sort of comes in, is how do you do that and what impact does it have? That's sort of what I sort of see quite a lot. I mean, like my main sort of background is with estimating and benchmarking, and being able to model those impacts on building performance. We can look for IoT and BIM, but it's that data quality as well is really, really important. And we can, I think that's maybe some of the challenges around some of the, I don't know whether this is correct or not, but maybe the data that's sent through to IFMA is the challenges in actually extracting that data out, or does it exist, or the quality and all those sort of things are really sort of key. So that's what I would say, is that sort of robust sort of data, but also the apples for apples sort of comparison when you're doing that building and benchmarking performance. Have we got a consistent standard for maintenance globally? It varies, doesn't it, with different regulatory sort of codes. That obviously impacts the space usage as well. So, what is in the building and what can we do with it? How are we going to maintain it? And then one of the other sort of things is thinking about the life cycle of the building as well. It is really sort of key. So like life cycle carbon assessments, whole life costing, life cycle costing, all those type of things. And then the benefits management of how that goes hand in hand is really sort of important. So
Sure. Yeah, I like how
Maybe-
you both. Yeah, go ahead, Machi. Go ahead.
Maybe one more comment, because when we talk about tools and what David said, and it all depends on what our goals are. So when we'll be talking about operations, we might use different tools. I believe as FMs, we use tools for years. So maybe that's why we try to say that we operate as usual. But on the other hand, when we have the sustainability initiatives, programs, etc., then depend on what we will choose, what is chosen for a specific building or the client. Again, different tools might be used, different benchmarking, different measurements. And then again, if it's COVID or not COVID, maybe other situation in the future, if we know what we need to measure, then we will use specific tool. Sometimes it might be even regular custom system that we're using for our FM activities. Sometimes it's dedicated platform, but we need to understand that having tools needs to help us to achieve our targets and goals dedicated for operation or sustainable goals. And I think it's not really expected from the market to use, a lot of tools. As less tools as we use is good.
Yeah, great. Thank you both so much. I think one of the overall arching themes I hear is using data actually helps us do something. Or as we use tools, it helps us to make a change as a facility manager. That's a great point. Thank you both so much. Let's go ahead and move on now to some of the details and data about sustainable operations and maintenance and what we actually found as we dived into the survey results and what this paper really talks about. So we looked at green certification as one of the first things. So green certification is a broad term that can mean a variety of different things depending on who you ask here. But in general, when we talk about green certification does your building have some sort of notice or certification that is been green certified? So think of LEED, for example. There's other types of certifications as well. Does our buildings have that? And so what this table here shows is the industry sector, so services, manufacturing, and institutional, and then what percentage of those respondents have some type of green certification. Now, again, we do have limited survey data for this here, but when we think about and we look at the North American version of the report, which has a lot more data with that, is that the use of green certification has been not a smooth bell curve. What I mean by that is that it's picked up a lot. About 10 years ago, there's a lot of certification, and over the last couple of years, we've noticed a bit of a decline in use of green certification as a way to manage our buildings. So it's interesting to look at that and see what the future may hold with that. But this is why we benchmark to track and see how these things are being used. What this next slide shows are the use of recycling programs. So what this shows is the percentage of different types of materials. So we have batteries, paper, light bulbs, and so forth, and the percentage of respondents who actually do this. Now, you might be thinking here, okay, this data is kind of interesting, but what do I do with it? See, this is the value in benchmarking, is that you can look at what your peers do and then make adjustments based on what you see others do. Or if there's something that you don't do, you can adjust and modify it to do those types of programs. And one of the biggest reasons why we look at benchmarking data is to help make that business case more effective, when you go to ask for something from your executive. So if you say, hey, we need to start a recycling program, 80% of our peers throughout Europe have some sort of recycling program. We don't. Okay, it makes that a lot easier now to have that ask once you have the benchmarking data. On the right-hand side, what this shows here, this is a new measure that's not found in other IFMA reports, is the percentage of waste diverted from the landfill. So you can see that services, about half of it, half of the waste is diverted. Manufacturing, based on our limited sample size, none. And institutional, again, about half the respondents said they were able to divert, half of their waste was diverted to the landfill. So this kind of leads me to another discussion point here is, when you think about benchmarking, I'll kind of direct this one towards David at first here, but when you think about benchmarking and how that affects our recycling program as a facility manager, how should those benchmarks drive us to do something different, especially when you think about sustainability? David, any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, so I mean, like the whole or one of the main purposes of the benchmarking is to identify sort of best practices. Jake, so you sort of pulled that up with that data. So what can we learn to support our business case, but also what are others doing that we can learn from? So that's like the first thing with the benchmarking. What are others doing out there? We need to have like the inside view, which is our own site, but we need that outside view. What are others doing? Not just within your own country, because you'll have different waste sort of standards and recycling and sustainability sort of standards, but globally, what is sort of taking place to help you like maybe not innovate, but do stuff that is sort of low hanging fruit, easy to sort of do. So that sort of like be the first thing. But also, what is a poor practice as well? So if a building, so you get the benchmarking data through and an activity takes place, and actually me spending €100,000 on a building to put IoT in place, but it's the wrong type of sensors, learn from that. That isn't going to drive, so it's poor practices as well. So it is that sort of learning from the benchmarking is really sort of key. There's the different benchmarking techniques as well. So we've mentioned around like competitive and internal and external sort of benchmarking, what we've just sort of mentioned, but there's the strategic level sort of benchmarking as well. So you can extrapolate that from the data is what are those different standards impacting at a country level that I can start to learn from. There are ISO sort of standards as well. The one that sort of interested me, to be honest, Jake, was around the construction debris, because I'm quite interested in sort of circular economy. So those old buildings, those 25-year-old buildings, actually, are they performing well enough from like a life cycle carbon assessment through life cost management and all that sort of good stuff? Do we just pull it down and reuse it because it's actually from a sustainability and cost point of view more effective to do that? You would hope not, but it gives you that information. And if you are designing a new building, what can we design in that actually we can extract out that steel, for example? So I'm quite interested in blockchain. So if you use a blockchain passport for steel, for example, what is the quality of that steel and how can we monitor that through? And it informs all that decision making, doesn't it? That's all it's going to do is inform. What you choose to do with that should drive best practice and avoid sort of poor practice. But that's the sort of key thing that should come from the benchmarking. But it comes back to the data again, doesn't it? That's the sort of key thing. You need that data and that analysis to generate those insights for the best practice and the poor sort of practice as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. It's kind of interesting. We did get a question here about from Dada asked, can we actually reduce our office space given the current situation? And I think that kind of ties nicely into this idea of benchmarking of what are your peers doing, but also maybe not benchmarking per se, but what are you actually allowed to do from a legal standpoint in terms of leases and different things related to that. So I think there's a need to be flexible when you look at our office space and what does that future look like in terms of making adjustments. Machi, do you have any experience on that side of things in terms of leasing, using benchmarks to evaluate our leasing options. Any thoughts or insights from you on that side of things?
We had that situation last year that a lot of tenants wanted to optimize their space due to COVID and or other activities, maybe plans, changes, etc. But the biggest challenge, I believe, in every country was legal aspect, that contracts were not ready for that. So, of course, depend on the building owner, depend if it's partnership or it's rather a tenant leasing contract. We saw that a lot of discussion about that. So on one side, it's legal aspect before launching it and investing in technology to help you understand, benchmark your space, and then optimize it. Check your contract if it's possible to change it, or maybe you will be able to change it in a 5-year period. So investing now might not give you the best return on investment. Of course, you will invest, you will gather data, you will be more prepared for that time, but definitely need to double check if it's possible to change it in your contract. On the other side, we need to remember that in the building there is a lot of technology already, and maybe it's good to have. We had that situation where one IT company that wanted to invest in IoT sensors, and then we had a meeting with them as the FM that operates the building, and then they find out that there is a lot of sensors connected to building management systems they can use. So then they could optimize the cost of the whole investment. Of course, it's expected involvement of the building owner to, let's say, share some of the technology and data from this technology. But thanks to that, the tenant could optimize the cost of this investment. So one side is legal. The second one is double check what your building has already. Maybe there is a place to optimize some technology investment in this area.
Great. Yeah, those are great points. Thank you, Maciej. Okay, let's go ahead and keep going. Again, folks, if you have questions or comments, definitely use the chat box, and we'll keep an eye on that, and let's keep going here. Another part of the sustainability considerations is what we have found is that our concierge professionals, custodians or janitors, they have great insights, and actually they're kind of the frontline people that can actually enable us or help us meet our sustainability goals. So we looked at, we asked respondents, what practices do they use in terms of green cleaning? Having auditing, that's a very common thing. More than half the respondents said they audit their practices. They document what they use is another commonly used tool. And then training, course certification is some other tools available here. But really, the main idea that came from the paper, as discussed in the paper, is to lay out, make a plan, document what you want to do, and then evaluate how well those practices are being accomplished, right? And it's not difficult, but actually the follow through to actually lay out a plan and to measure our performance against that plan, that's where the rubber meets the road, as it were. Now, what this next question here is, what programs are used by respondents? So you can see that the ISO standard on top is used by far by many. Almost 40%, more than 40% of respondents said that their buildings are certified. There's BREEAM, there's other measuring processes. LEED is up there as well, and then a couple other programs that are listed out. Now, I will say that these results here are quite unique for the European region. In other locations throughout Asia and especially North America, it's to a much less degree, right? And so as we know that there are different impacts that drive, why these things are happening here, and that's why we ask people what is used, but also, how do we apply those within our facilities here? Okay, so that kind of thinks about, and David, I know, in fact, all three of us have talked about this on and off over the past several months here. But in your mind, just I say almost your opinion, what does the future look like of sustainability in Europe? You can talk to us about, as a facility manager, what can we start doing today to get ready for the next 5, 10, 20 years in terms of sustainability requirements? David, do you want to start us off here about your thoughts and perspectives on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to the utilization of the space, isn't it? The first sort of thing is, what is that building doing? Do you need to how is that facility going to be used going forward? Are you going to baseline it now, what you're doing now? How is it going to move forward? So offices, are you going to be doing more hot desking, reducing your footprint? Wherever it is, it's always down to the input, isn't it? The scope of what that sort of building is. Trying to understand that. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges, really, to be honest, is looking horizon scanning and looking at where are we going. And it comes back to your business as well, really, doesn't it? To be honest, is like, where is our business sort of going? What facilities are we going to? Manufacturing, for example. Are we changing what we're going to produce? All those sort of questions need to be sort of answered first. And then once you've established that, what can we do to understand and realize the biggest benefits for us as a company, and what targets do we need to set to be, like regulatory compliant, so different and statutory within our own region and location. So we need to bake those in to understand what we need to do. So that is the first sort of thing. And that then develops into prioritization, doesn't it, of what is it we need to do? What would we like to do? And then what is a nice to have to do? And then bringing in the benchmarking to align that, really, to be honest. So we can tick off, so that list that you add up, Jake, around like the batteries, footfall, for example, how does that drive our cleaning, stuff like that. Can we use other cleaning methods and things like that? So it's like pulling in that sort of technology to understand and realize those benefits for sustainability and for targets that we're going to set ourselves, whether they're mandatory or what we want to do as a business, because that's where we want to go, or what is a nice to have. And I think that prioritization really is the sort of key thing. I think what it will look like as we start to see working from home, we were discussing earlier, weren't we, about transportation? We've got strikes at the moment. Is that going to be a common feature? Are we going to go into a recession globally? I think all these macroeconomic sort of factors need to be thought about. I mean, the facility manager we'll probably won't get into that sort of level of detail, I'd imagine, or it might do, but it's just considerations really that should be, because that will drive that horizon scanning of where we're going in like 3, 5, 10 years sort of time. Once we've done that, then obviously somebody's got to fund it. So are there so we fund it as a business, or are there grants within your location? Or somebody mentioned, I saw on the screen about like the UN, is there like a central funding that you can go for or something like that? Is to think about those sort of wider sort of things, and then the benefit and that value for money sort of case as well. So that supports your sustainability sort of approach. I think in Europe, I think that's where we sort of need to go, really.
Sure. And how about you, Maciej? I mean, if I'm a facility manager, what should I be thinking about, right? I mean, I know you worked in the industry still in the industry, but you were an FM for a while. I mean, if you were talking with an FM right now, what sorts of things, 2 or 3 things they should be thinking about like today? Any thoughts on that?
I did note right now that in Europe, it's quite interesting to look for European perspective, because we have in Europe different countries with different history and different experience what we are doing and how we are managing and benchmarking. Benchmarking in Poland is, let's say, starting. So what we see in Poland, we have, as David said, companies with good practices. They have their own goals. They want to benchmark and then be more effective. Then we have 2 other in Poland that are more most common. One is minimum legal requirements. So I will do just this and nothing else. And we have a lot of buildings like that. Again, with efficiency, with energy, with waste and all this stuff. And now we have the new green certificate expectations. So in Poland, we have at this moment, year to year, more than 250 new buildings certified year by year. It's quite a big number for Poland. I have a couple figures. I'm not going to give all of them, but 87% of all office buildings in Poland are certified, at least one. Some of them have 2 certificates. So from FM perspective, we now need to be more interested in that topic because we need to understand what is or will be expected from us. Since maybe in the last 3 years, we noticed a big investment in WELL certificates and ratings in Poland. So of course, BREEAM is the biggest. Now it's 81% of all certificates in Poland. WELL certificates, we have 1% of total, but to be half of it is in our portfolio, in the Laredo portfolio. So it's good that we have this benchmark, but the WELL certificate gave us a little bit different perspective, and we noticed that we need to talk more about it. We need to organize debates and case studies about it, because WELL certificates expect from FM bigger time investment into the building, into measurements, into benchmarking, because WELL certificate expects its red certification. Certificates and ratings. Ratings needs recertifications, apologies, every year, and then we have the shell and core building certificates needs to be done every 3 years. It's different when you have BREEAM or LEED certificate. So we noticed that we need to be focused on that. We need to create the platform to exchange the knowledge and experiences. So we started this April. We created the WELL for FM debate when we had the building owners, we had the property facility managers, and we also had a consultant, IWBI, so International Well Building Institute, so the body that creates that environment. And it was a really great discussion because we wanted to find out what we know, what we don't know, and how the FMs should be involved in the processes. And again, why the building owners or investors should understand what is the operational phase and what will be going on over there. So from my perspective and the perspective of FM in Poland, what we see, it's really, we need to be interested in that topic because it's huge and it's new. There's, as I said, it's only 13 buildings in Poland at the moment, and every year we see more and more of WELL certificates and ratings. Maybe one more comment, because we had this question about the European Union SDGs, which of them can our industry impact most? This is a good question, because we had this question in Poland already, and we are trying to address it to the market. I'm not going to answer that we know the answer, because it's 17 of them, as I remember, at the moment. And we are doing now the content gathering because we want to discuss it. And we will have, again, building owners that deliver FM by themselves, so they don't need external suppliers. We'll have property and facility managers, and we'll try to investigate at least 7 of the goals to find out how the FMs can or even it's possible to impact those. Of course, we don't have impact on some of them, but definitely those that are related to technology, sustainability, and workplace and space management definitely should be on our target as IFMA and FMs. And we know that our communities, like IT community, workplace revolutionaries, and ISUS community, are working also on that. So I don't know, maybe David, maybe you are more mature on that topic. Maybe you guys already did that, but in Poland, it's a topic for this year.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, we're sort of moving in the right direction. I mean, I just looked at that. If I'm being honest, I'd not come across those UN goals before, so I just had a quick look. And I think whilst we're talking about the economic, and the benefits to a company, we need to just sort of bear in mind, like, we have an ethical and altruistic sort of responsibility to do these things as well. I'm looking at like no poverty, zero hunger, good health, well-being, or gender equality, clean water. That's got to be the right thing to do as well, hasn't it? So it's it's the wider sort of doing the right thing as well. To be honest, I think that's another sort of key thing that can get through. Like when we're talking from like a business point of view, we have all got a responsibility. I mean, like all of us have got a responsibility globally to do the right thing as well.
Maybe one more comment to that, because European Union goals, targets, and all rules and regulations are treated different in different countries, and this is, again, we need to be aware of that. For example, we have countries that, like Belgium, I believe, it is the first to adopt it, and then we have Poland, maybe Hungary, that, let's say, they are somewhere on the end of that list. And we are facing the challenge that if we won't do it by ourselves as a private sector, our government won't help us. I mean, we can contact them and try to organize activities together, but then we'll face the reality that there are some more, let's say, that higher priorities on different activities, right? So from a FM perspective and owner's perspective and the FM market perspective, we really would like to move on. We have these expectations because a lot of buildings are owned by German, Sweden, US funds, so they expect us to do it in a different way. But on the other hand, everything what we will do needs to have some financing. It's from the private sector, because the government won't give you any grants or something on that. So this is what the challenges are also in some of European countries. So that's why EU goals might not be the hot topic in specific countries. It's good that we are starting this in Poland, because till this year you could saw that only on let's say sustainability conferences or debates, but now we see this year it's more and more on FM conferences and debates. So it's good to see that our industry noticed that topic and will be looking into that.
Sure.
Just if I could, on that, there's that sort of there's like a harmonization of those sort of standards of what we do, what is the bare sort of minimum, or what we have to do to be compliant, and all those sort of things that we've just gone through. But there's that sort of trade-off analysis of that list that you pulled up of what can we do, and that's where, like, sorry, drumming the beat about benchmarking, but you can like benchmark it to see what is the low cost stuff that we can all do, really. So like the batteries, for example, like in the UK, like my local shop, you see like a bin where I can go and put my batteries when I've finished using them and stuff like that. There's not a massive cost to that type of thing, and the impacts that it has, it's quite big for.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks, Henrik, for your comments. Yes, I had in mind United Nations, not European Union, but I wanted to refer to European Union as we have a lot of rules, especially around the sustainability, like Green Deal, etc. And I wanted to refer to that. So apologies for not describing that in the details. Thanks for the comment.
Yep, great. Thank you so much. So really the kind of last part of our presentation is really where the rubber meets the road here is we asked respondents how much of their annual facilities budget do they dedicate towards sustainability initiatives. And what we see here is that about a quarter of them don't have any funds allocated. So that kind of begs the question, well, if there's nothing going towards that, are we really trying to meet it? So about a quarter of people don't have any money. And then another large chunk, about 40%, have less than 2% of their annual budget, and then some other percentages down here. Now, in my view, this chart is only half the story here, because what we really want to know here is, like, if we're going to put money into something to accomplish something, well, then actually we want to know what's the outcome of that money. So if we spend, to set up a sustainability program, what is the actual outcome of what that is? And we don't have that data here. I think this will be coming in the future, but that's kind of the thinking, as we move forward here. So in summary, again, if you had questions, be sure to put those in the chat box, but I wanted to offer a couple summarizing points or key considerations as we think about this. The first thing is to start small. If you've never benchmarked your own facilities, or if you have a group of colleagues or peers, just start something. This could be as simple as annual concierge cost, or it could be maintenance cost, or something just very simple that we can look at. I am measuring this, it's easy to do, and you start there. That's where I'd recommend you start. Most folks don't do this, so just doing something, anything is better, than not doing something. So start small, make it easy. The other thing to think about too is what I call good, better, and best. And what I mean by that, it's good to have benchmarks, have something. It's better to have benchmarks that are relevant to our bottom line or to our executive leadership, but it's best to actually use those benchmarks and be able to do something with that information. So when you think about benchmarking, IFMA has lots of reports about this topic here, is to use the data to drive us to do something, whether it's a stronger business case to our executives or whether it's adopting practices that don't have any cost with it. It's motivating. It should drive us to do something and change something about how we manage or run our facilities. The third thing here is, like I mentioned, that good benchmarking leads to good business cases. I mean, anytime that anybody's gone to ask for money for anything, if you don't have a good explanation as to why we need to do that, then it might as well not even happen. Benchmarking can help us make a stronger, better business case. And lastly, FMs, when I think about the FM of the future, I think a key part of this is going to be data-driven, not just in terms of how our buildings are run, although that's certainly a big part of it, but also how do we engage with our industry partners? How do we be transparent, fair, open as to how we engage and interact with our industry partners? Because many times what I have seen that one of the main drivers of poor performance or the inability to have a successfully run building facility is because of our partners that are on the projects, aren't skilled, or we as an owner don't have a good relationship to actually make that a successful outcome for everybody. So I think about if we imagine the facility manager of the future, a big part of that, again, is having better, more efficient industry partnerships, but also having data to support and back up what we're doing here. So in summary, that's kind of it here. If you would like a copy of today's slides, be sure to send me an email, or anybody on this call here today. I'll turn it over to Maciej. Any final thoughts or closing words of wisdom for us here?
Apologies, was muted. I see that the future is I'm looking at the future, as a positive. So in this area, we see a lot of good changes. We see the goals, targets that are all around us, and of course, it's maybe not the best way, but we see that now in Poland, being around the sustainability, ESG, SDGs, etc., is really common because of marketing and all this area. Of course, it shouldn't be this way, but we see that a lot of companies like building owners or the consultants just compare using this, right? It's like a competition. Let's hope this will give us good results, not only a lot of documents or posts on social media, but we definitely, as FMs, we believe that it's the way we should go, and we need to increase our or develop our experience and best practices in that. So I hope this will be the target for the FM for the coming years. And next the release of that report, apologies, will show us a little bit different results.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maciej. David, do you have a nugget of wisdom for us here?
I would say I just saw what Aaron had just put on about he's done a survey, and I think that's great, is that you do that incremental, do something, use the benchmarking, learn something, but also communicate it. And I think that is the sort of key: communicate those benefits and get more buy-in from your stakeholders at all levels to get that funding if you need it, or communicate the benefit and get more buy-in. That would be what I would drop in.
Great, thank you. Well, folks, thank you so much for being here today. We will have 2 follow-up webinars. The next one will be focused on concierge janitorial services. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. And then the third one will be focused on maintenance and soft and hard services with FM. Again, these are all focused in Europe, so be sure to keep an eye out for those. Again, on behalf of IFMA and everybody here today, Maciej, David, we sincerely appreciate your time here and your insights, and we greatly appreciate that. And with that said, Nick, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Thank you for attending today's webinar. That concludes today's webinar. Please send us your questions and comments at research@ifma.org, and we'll hopefully get back to you shortly. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye.